In 1862, in a San Francisco saloon, a man named Jerry Thomas set whiskey on fire and threw it. A ribbon of blue flame arced between two silver mugs in the dark, again and again, as the crowd gasped. And then he handed the drink over, still smoking. They called him the Professor. He wore diamond stick pins, kept his own silver bar tools, and turned mixing a drink into pure theater. This is the origin of the bartender, the showman who made a fortune from a burning cup. So how did a diamond-studded showman throwing fire in a saloon come to define a craft that America would, within 2 generations, make a crime overnight? The bartender is one of the most familiar figures in the world, the person on the other side of the counter who pours your drink and, somehow, ends up hearing your whole life story. We tend to think of the job as simple, unskilled, a stopgap between other things. It is nothing of the sort. Behind that counter sits one of the oldest social technologies human beings ever built, and a profession that has been worshipped, criminalized, exiled, and resurrected, sometimes all within a single lifetime. To understand it, you have to follow the bar from a Roman street counter through a single night in 1920, when the whole trade was outlawed between one midnight and the next, all the way to the craft cocktail bar on your corner. Start with the thing itself, the bar, because the word is not a metaphor. In the old drinking houses, a literal wooden barrier, a bar, ran across the room, separating the customer from the barrels and bottles behind it. The person who tended that bar, who guarded the stock and served across the divide, was the bartender. And the idea is ancient. In the ruins of Pompeii, frozen in the year 79, archaeologists found the thermopolia, street counters with great jars set into them, where Romans leaned in to buy hot spiced wine and food, the fast counter service of the ancient world. The Latin word for such a shop, taberna, is the one that gives us tavern. And here is the detail almost no one remembers. For much of history, the person behind the counter was a woman. In medieval England, brewing ale was women's work, and the alewife brewed in her own home and sold what she did not need. She signaled a fresh batch by hanging a broom or a bundle of twigs, an ale stake, above her door, and she often wore a tall hat to be seen in a crowded market. A woman, a pointed hat, a cauldron of bubbling brew, sometimes a cat kept to guard the grain from mice. Some historians argue, and others doubt, that this ordinary figure helped shape the picture we now call a witch. Whether or not that is true, the deeper fact is not in dispute. The ancestor of the modern bartender was very often a working woman, until brewing grew into big business and men pushed her out of it. Now, cross to America, because this is where the bartender became an artist. The word cocktail first appears, actually defined in print, in 1806. In a small New York newspaper, which explained it, half mocking, as a stimulating liquor made of spirits, sugar, water, and bitters. That simple formula, a spirit sweetened and seasoned, was the seed of an entire craft. Across the 1800s, the American bar became a temple to it. A long mahogany counter, a gleaming brass foot rail, rows of bottles arranged like an altar, and often a free lunch laid out to keep the drinkers drinking. And standing behind it, no longer a humble servant but a star, was the American bartender. Nobody is even certain why it is called a cocktail, and the theories are wonderful. Some say it comes from the old practice of docking a horse's tail so it stood up cocked, a term that drifted to mean something lively and mixed. Others point to the coquetier, a French egg cup supposedly used to serve early mixed drinks in New Orleans, its name slurred by English tongues into cocktail. A few insist it meant the dregs tapped from near the barrel's cock, or spout. The honest answer is that we simply do not know. The word arrived, stuck fast, and outlived every explanation anyone has ever offered for it. And there is a hidden ingredient in the American cocktail that had nothing to do with the alcohol at all: ice. For most of history, a cold drink in summer was an impossible luxury, but in the early 1800s, an American named Frederick Tudor built an entire industry out of cutting ice from frozen New England lakes and shipping it around the world. Americans, almost uniquely, had cheap ice, and ice transformed what a bartender could do, chilling, diluting, and clinking in a way Europeans simply could not match. The cocktail, shaken hard and served cold, is in a real sense a child of American ice. That theatrical rattle of the shaker is the sound of a luxury that once cost a fortune. No one embodied that more completely than the man in our opening, Jerry Thomas. Working from the 1850s onward, Thomas turned bartending into performance. His signature, The Blue Blazer was exactly what the hook described. Blazing whiskey poured in a long arc of fire between two silver mugs, a trick that demanded real nerve and looked like sorcery. He wore jewels, kept a set of solid silver bar tools worth a small fortune, and at his peak reportedly earned more than the Vice President of the United States. And in 1862, he did something that outlasted all the showmanship. He published the first true bartender's guide, How to Mix Drinks, or the Bon Vivant's Companion, writing the recipes down, standardizing the craft, and turning a scattering of local tricks into a profession with a canon. The bartender now had a book. And watch a good bartender work, because you are watching a century of quiet engineering in miniature. The jigger that measures a pour to the fraction of an ounce. The shaker that chills and dilutes a drink in a precise handful of seconds. The strainer, the long bar spoon, the discipline of building a drink in the right order so it arrives balanced rather than muddled. Jerry Thomas wrote much of this down for the first time, and nearly every fussy modern gesture behind the bar descends from that early attempt to turn instinct into a recipe anyone could repeat. The showmanship is only the surface. Underneath it sits real, teachable, hard-won craft. And here is the hinge of the whole story, the single most violent turn any profession in this series has taken. On the 17th of January, 1920, the United States enacted Prohibition, and the making and selling of alcohol became illegal across the entire country. Read that again, because of what it actually meant for a human being. A skilled, respected, lawful tradesman went to sleep a professional and woke up a criminal. Nothing about him had changed. The law had changed around him. Overnight, the gleaming bars were shuttered or smashed, the recipes driven into the dark, and a craft that had taken a century to build was outlawed between one midnight and the next. It is one of the only times in modern history that a peaceful, established profession was simply abolished by decree. What happened next saved the craft and nearly killed it at the same time. Some bartenders went underground, into the speakeasies, where the quality of the liquor collapsed and the whole point became hiding it, often drowning rough bathtub spirits in sugar and juice just to make them swallowable. But the best of them did something else. They left. American bartenders scattered across the world, carrying their craft with them like refugees carrying a language. One of them, Harry Craddock, crossed to London and presided over the bar at the Savoy Hotel, where in 1930 he compiled the Savoy Cocktail Book, one of the most important drink books ever written. Others sailed to Havana, where the daiquiri was perfected, and a young Ernest Hemingway would soon be drinking at the elbow of a Cuban master named Constantino. The American cocktail survived the 1920s mostly because it fled into exile. Prohibition was finally repealed at the end of 1933, but the damage was strange and lasting. You cannot outlaw a craft for 13 years and expect it to return whole. A generation of apprenticeship had been broken. The masters were old, or abroad, or dead, and much of their knowledge did not survive the gap. For decades afterward, American bartending drifted into shortcuts. Sour mix poured from a bottle. Speed valued over skill. The artistry of Jerry Thomas half forgotten. The profession had been resurrected on paper, but its living memory had been badly torn, and Prohibition changed the room itself in a way that outlasted it. The old American saloon had been a rough, male world, one that mostly kept women firmly outside. But the speakeasy, being already illegal, had no such rules to keep, and for the first time men and women drank side by side at the same bar. When repeal finally came, that mixing did not reverse. The lawless little rooms of the 1920s had quietly invented the modern bar, a place where nearly everyone was welcome, and in doing so they had, without ever meaning to, brought women back toward the counter. Their ancestors, the alewives, had once owned outright. So what is the bartender actually for? Beyond the drink. Here is what all the showmanship and the recipes are built on top of. Sociologists talk about the third place, somewhere that is neither home nor work, where a community actually meets. And for centuries, the bar has been exactly that, and the bartender its keeper. He sets the mood of the room, controls its pace, decides quietly when someone has had enough, remembers your name and your usual, and, famously, he listens. People confess things across a bar they would tell no one else, because the bartender is close enough to trust and distant enough to be safe. A stranger with a sympathetic ear and every reason to keep you comfortable. The drink is only the ticket in. The real service is that, for an hour, someone is glad you came and is paying attention to you. So what does this profession look like today, and where does the money sit? Here are the numbers. In the 1980s and 90s, a bartender named Dale DeGroff, working at the Rainbow Room high above New York, went back to the old books, to Jerry Thomas and the Savoy, and rebuilt the craft from fresh ingredients, sparking a craft cocktail renaissance that has since spread around the globe. Today, there are well over 500,000 bartenders working in the United States alone, and many more the world over. At the everyday level, the base wage is often low, and the real income arrives in tips, which is why a busy, skilled bartender in a major city can earn a genuinely good living from a job the tax forms still treat as barely above minimum wage. And at the very top, the craft has its stars again. World rankings of the best bars on earth. Bartenders who consult, write books, and open their own rooms, direct descendants of the professor and his burning cup. Here is the worked example. On a $15 cocktail, the liquor and the fruit inside it might cost the bar only a couple of dollars. You are not paying for the ounce of spirit. You are paying for the room, the skill, and the welcome. Exactly as people always have. So go back one last time to that dark San Francisco saloon, to Jerry Thomas catching a rope of blue fire between two silver cups while the whole room holds its breath. Notice what the crowd was really buying. Not 2 ounces of whiskey, which they could have swallowed anywhere for pennies. They were buying the spectacle, the warmth, the feeling of being somewhere that mattered with someone who made them feel welcome. That is the secret the bartender has always known. From the Roman counter, to the alewife store, to the speakeasy, to the bar on your street. The drink was never really the point. The feeling of being welcome is the product. That's not an accident. That's the business model. And it is also why no law could ever truly kill this trade. You can outlaw the liquor. You cannot outlaw the need for somewhere to belong. So the next time someone tells you bartending is not a real profession, remember that it is old enough to appear in the ruins of Pompeii, skilled enough to fill its own books, and dangerous enough that a nation once tried to erase it overnight and failed. The person across the bar is not just pouring a drink. They are running one of the oldest rooms humanity ever invented. The one where strangers are allowed, for a little while, to feel at home. If this video changed how you look at the person on the other side of the bar, subscribe, because next we're covering more everyday jobs whose real history nobody tells you.